What's that sound? It's for amusement only, the EM and Bingo Pinball Podcast.
Welcome back to For Amusement Only. This is Nick Baldridge. Tonight I wanted to go over the importance of cleaning and rebuilding stepper units in an EM machine. Now, I've talked about this in the past, and I may have even dedicated a show to it, but I feel like it bears repeating in this instance as we enter the month of the Bally Bingo in the run-up to the York Show. The York Show, by the way, is October 9th and 10th at the York Fairgrounds in York, Pennsylvania. It's also called the White Rose Game Room Show. And remember that this year is going to be the first ever Bingo Row, right beside the wood rail row at York. You'll get to play a bunch of fun games, get to meet some of the bingo luminaries that you've heard on this very podcast, and most importantly, you'll get to play a large variety of games. If you're on the East Coast and able to attend, I'd love to see you there. So, stepper units. This comes to mind because I have been following Adam, another podcast host from the One and Done Pinball Podcast's restoration thread on a Grand Prix. Now, I've worked on a few Grand Prix, and there are quite a few stepper units in that game. Just like in a Bally Bingo, it's important to clean and rebuild each one of the steppers in the game for crisp operation to ensure that your game runs smoothly. So, let's go over the process here. First of all, let me describe what a stepper looks like. You've got what I call the spider on one side of it. That's attached with a screw or a nut. On the other side, you have a bakelite disc with rivets and wires soldered into the top and the back, sometimes in a second kind of piggybacked bakelite piece. And then on the back side, you've got maybe a couple switches, and most importantly, the nylon or metal gear, which moves when the solenoids, also on the back, are activated. Now, on most steppers, there is a step-up solenoid and then a reset solenoid. So let's go over that kind of stepper. Step 1 is to push the reset solenoid and ensure that the stepper is in the reset or default position. This is pretty easy to tell because normally there will be a switch which should be actuated when the stepper's in the reset position. Alternatively, the stepper will be oriented so that one of the main contacts is pointed straight horizontally. Sometimes you can also see, after you loosen the screw or nut, where things are supposed to be. But before you do that, step 2 is to mark the spider arm of your choosing with a Sharpie. Step 3 is to mark the rivet disc directly above the marked arm with the Sharpie. This will serve as a visual guide to ensure you're not 180 degrees off when reassembling. Now you want to loosen and remove the screw that holds the spider onto the disc. Then you want to gently remove the spider from the shaft of the gear. Now you'll have access to the rivet disc, but we need to disassemble further to clean. There's a spring on the back. It's what I call a clock spring. It's wound in a particular way to allow for clean movement. To remove, you need to A. Grasp the part of the spring that winds around the armature above, away from the gear shaft, firmly, and lift to clear the armature. B. While still grasping the spring, start unwinding manually, counting the number of revolutions made. 1, 2, 3, and so forth. C. Write down the number of revolutions it took to unwind fully. D. Mark the hole the other side of the spring was in the gear. This will help on reassembly, though you can skip this step if needed. Next. Now you can remove your gear. Or can you? Some steppers have a switch stack that's physically in the way. If this is the case, you need to find a twist tie, unscrew the 2 screws that hold the switch stack in place. Note that some switch stacks on steppers are comprised of 2 separate stacks above and below a mounting plate. Pay careful attention, as all that's going to try to fall apart as you unscrew it. Take a photo to help. Reassemble the switch stacks as they would appear on the mounting plate and push the screws back through the stacks. Now take your twist tie and wrap it around the loose stack. This will temporarily hold it in place while you clean. Next, remove the gear. Next step, to clean the rivets, I use a green Scotch-Brite pad and scrub until the rivets are shiny. Then I take a drop of 3-in-1 oil or 2, this is the household 3-in-1 oil in the red and white can, and put it on my finger. Then run it around the circle that the spider travels, covering all the rivets. This is one of the only places in the game that requires lubrication. Most of the rest of your time will be spent removing old, unneeded lubrication from other areas. To reassemble, you need to put the gear back in, put the switch stacks back in place, then you need to put the spider back on and screw it into place. Make sure that the Sharpie mark lines up on both the rivet disc and on the spider. Then on the back side, you need to put the clock spring back on. Now you put the little hooked end, which goes into the gear, in the marked hole, and then wind it around using the count that you took on your notepad. 1, 2, 3, and then hook it onto the end of the armature. Now here comes the fun part. This is how you test. To test, you push the step-up solenoid. Does it step crisply to the next rivet? If so, great. Push the reset solenoid and see if it snaps back into the 0 position. Now push the step up twice. Does it step up crisply? If so, great. Push the reset solenoid. Now step it up 3 times, and so forth. Do it all the way for every single position of that unit. If you don't, you may find out that you have something assembled in such a way that it's going to cause a problem. And it is very hard to troubleshoot ephemeral stepper problems. It's hard enough to troubleshoot stepper problems, period. So don't make more work for yourself. Take the time and check every stepper position. So, now you've got a rebuilt stepper. Let's take the example of Grand Prix and say it's one of the bonus units. There's 2 of them in that game. You have to rebuild both in order to get great operation out of that machine. In a bingo, likewise, you have steppers for the odds. You have steppers that count the number of replays that you've won off of a single game. And you may have other steppers which allow you access to certain features. All of these need to be disassembled, cleaned, and then reassembled. Once you do so, your game will be 1,000,000,000% more reliable. Now, I'm not the type of person that advocates cleaning and adjusting every single switch in the game, mostly because it's really unlikely to help anything, especially if it's one of your first games. Now, I'll tell you a story about myself here. Double Up was the first game that I bought that required major work. And so I took the approach of cleaning and rebuilding every stepper, and then my game had problems. And because I didn't have the experience of reading the Bally Bingo manuals, and I didn't have anyone that really played the 20-hole games locally that I could ask questions of, Steve Smith was very gracious with his time and let me ask him 85 million questions every day about how the game is supposed to work. But I went through and cleaned and adjusted every switch in that game. To this day, the game still gives me odd problems every once in a while, and I put it all down to having messed with too much at once. So, that's all for tonight. Hope that's food for thought. Thank you again for listening. My name again is Nick Baldridge. You can reach me at foramusementonlypodcast@gmail.com, or you can call me on the Bingos line. That's 724-BINGOS1, 724-246-4671. You can listen to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, via RSS, on Facebook, on Twitter at Bingo Podcast. You can follow me on Instagram at nbaldridge, or you can listen to us on our website, which is foramusementonly.libsyn.com. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.